I've been out here since like 6:30. It's really humid, but it feels nice. It's supposed to rain today, so I'm actually working on setting up a shade structure and direct sowing a few seeds. This is what my yard looks like right now. I hate it. On top of it being really messy, I was trying to set up the shade cloth, but I couldn't attach it to anything, so it's just kind of hanging there. This is what I'm working on this morning. I bought these conduit poles. These are 1 inch, and then I am rigging this little part up so that I can attach my shade cloth right here. I take a conduit hanger, it looks like this. I unscrew this part, and then I bought some eye bolts. I put this in here, and then I start threading it from inside, about right there. Then I clamp this over. I attach the screw back on. And then I can attach my shade cloth right here. At this point, I was still trying to figure out exactly how to set up shade cloth in the garden. Shade cloth is something that I found to be extremely helpful whenever it comes to gardening, especially during the summer months here in the low desert of Arizona, because the sun is just so intense. And shade cloth helps a ton because it blocks out a certain portion of the light. In the past, I'd work with black shade cloth because that's all I could afford, and it was very inexpensive. And while it worked in blocking out the sun, it also made a lot of my plants start stretching for light. So then I decided to finally invest in white shade cloth after I had started saving up and I started making money on social media. But unfortunately, I came across another problem, which is that the piece of shade cloth that I had originally ordered for my main garden was a little too small, so I decided to try and set it up in the orchard to protect at least my tropicals, if nothing else. And I'd been brainstorming for a while and going to hardware stores and just looking around and trying to see how I could set it up and attach it in a way where it was suspended several feet above my trees. And the reason for that is because if it's too low, the branches of the trees brush against it and eventually they start becoming damaged, the leaves get torn. So I wanted to make sure that I could set it up where it was high up enough to where there would be enough airflow and room for the trees to be able to sway back and forth without hitting the shade cloth. And while I was at Lowe's, I saw the conduit poles and I figured these would work perfectly. They were a little bit of an initial investment because they were around $18 per pole, and instead of attaching them straight to the wall, I decided to attach them to T-posts. I figured I could pound the T-post into the ground and then put the pole up against the T-post and zip tie it in place. That way I wouldn't have to drill holes into the brick wall and I could have the shade cloth be tall enough. And I couldn't wait to see if this idea worked. However, I came across a really big problem, which is that it was still very early in the morning, and because I live in the suburbs, I have neighbors, and so I always want to be considerate of them. I certainly don't want to wake them up by pounding T-posts into the ground in order to set up my shade cloth. So I figured that getting the poles ready was good enough, and everything else could hold off for a little bit longer. Something I struggle with and am still learning how to do is pace myself. Even though I wanted to finish the whole project earlier in the day, the time wasn't right, but not just that, there was so much humidity in the air that I found myself struggling to breathe. Humidity is rare in the low desert as it almost never rains and the intense heat we experience is dry heat. All I really had enough energy to do was to move the sweet lime tree into its new location, which used to be the home of a gorgeous Burbank plum that was unfortunately taken out by the summer sun just a few weeks prior, but even that was more of a struggle than usual. A dolly definitely would have made the whole process much easier, but in the early stages of a garden, every tool, big or small, is an investment, and after spending so much on the shade cloth, a dolly would have to wait. After moving the sweet lime tree, I decided to treat myself to a little snack while I cooled down inside. I noticed the first and only ripe fruit on my fruit punch mango tree and a few Mexican cream guavas on the ground that I hadn't even noticed forming on the tree, so I felt excited to taste both fruit after waiting for so long.
Here I have a Mexican cream guava and a fruit punch mango. I only got one this year, and I only got a handful of these because most of them fell before I even noticed, and worms got in them. So I'm just gonna try them with you guys. First, the Mexican cream. This is so sweet. Oh my god. Huh. That one's a 10 out of 10. Quite literally the sweetest guava I've ever had in my entire life. Oh my god, look at the fruit punch mango on it. It's little. It is really little, but all that matters is the flavor. And hopefully next year we get a lot more.
I would rate the Mexican cream guava a 10 out of 10 as it was extremely sweet and creamy. The seeds were small and not too hard like the ones I've tried from other guava varieties like the Tropic White. I would also rate the Fruit Punch Mango a 10 out of 10. The flesh was very sweet and juicy, and the mango had so much depth of flavor and tasted much more complex than any mango I've ever tried. It was smaller than the mangoes I usually buy at the store, but it was the first one my tree had ever produced after setting hundreds of rose gold colored blooms on panicles that smelled like brown sugar. Did tasting this make me want to grow 100 more mango trees of different varieties? Absolutely. After taking some time to rest and relax, I felt ready to conquer the shade cloth. I wasn't entirely sure what the plan was, but I'd gotten some fantastic ideas from gardeners like you. Someone had recommended using a pulley style setup to attach my shade cloth and be able to open and close it as I needed throughout the year. I thought this idea was genius, and I tried looking up so many tutorials and inspo on how to set something like that up, and most were recommending to use wire rope, but truthfully, I was extremely intimidated by it. At one point, I even drove over to Lowe's and found the aisles where I could purchase the wire rope, but after standing in the aisle and staring at it for ages trying to convince myself to buy it, I chickened out. I'm not sure why I was so scared of it at the time. The texture and roughness of the rope was off-putting to me for some reason, and I wasn't sure how I would attach it or cut it to the correct size, and the whole thing felt so overwhelming that I decided to use something I felt more comfortable with, which was clothesline. I wasn't sure whether this would actually work, but I like the simplicity of it because I didn't need any additional tools other than scissors to cut it, and I could tie it myself without too much difficulty. Prepping the conduit poles earlier in the day definitely sped up the process so I could focus on setting up the T-posts. I decided to go this route instead of attaching them to the cinder block wall for a few reasons, but the main one was I didn't own a hammer drill or an impact driver to be able to drill holes into the cinder block wall, but I did own a T-post driver. My idea was to pound the T-post into the ground, then I'd use several zip ties to attach the conduit pole to the T-post, and this way, if I ever needed to take the shade cloth down, it would be relatively easy. I used heavy-duty zip ties as they were the most inexpensive to find, and later on learned about metal zip ties, which could also work and would probably last longer. Usually, zip ties work well for garden projects during the fall, winter, and early spring, but in the summer, the heat gets so intense to the point where even the most durable, ultra heavy-duty zip ties become brittle and break easily with the strong gusts of hot, dry wind that come through. Something that probably would have made the process much easier would have been to attach a clothesline to the conduit pole before attaching the pole to the T-post. Trying to do it after was significantly harder and took much longer as well. The process itself wasn't too difficult, but dragging the ladder back and forth between the shade cloth and the conduit poles was very draining, especially since I had to carefully navigate the heavy ladder through the narrow pathways. After I was done attaching the two conduit poles and the clothesline, I began attaching the shade cloth to them by looping zip ties through the grommets and using them sort of like shower curtain clips. At the time, I thought about buying actual shower clips, but I was worried that they might be too heavy or get brittle fast as they are mostly used indoors. And I was also trying to keep costs as low as possible, and replacing the zip ties after a few months would be much cheaper than replacing shower clips. As I explain all this, I realize how simple it all sounds, but truthfully, completing a project like this is really difficult. The air still felt very humid, but I tried not to get my hopes up because the last few days I'd been stood up by the forecast of rain and I refused to get heartbroken again. Working outside at all is difficult during the summer months, and the humidity made it 10 times worse, so I constantly felt out of breath. So I don't want to mislead you into thinking the project was a piece of cake. It was very challenging, and I knew that when I finally went back inside, I'd feel physically exhausted. But projects like these also give me a huge sense of accomplishment because they help me push myself, and I'm able to conquer fears that I never would have imagined I could be capable of overcoming a few years ago. I also like working on these projects alone, so I don't have to talk or interact with anyone else because it gives my mind a moment to decompress and relax. Aside from the huffing and puffing, as I work in silence, my mind races with plans of future garden projects and dreams of a future property where I can plant even more abundance for my family. Mostly, though, I think about a very special harvest for which time is quickly ticking by. I make mental notes of the crops I need to sow alongside a list of other to-dos that need to be completed for this particular harvest. Finally, I tied a long piece of clothesline to the end of the shade cloth so I could pull it back and forth without having to get on a ladder, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that it worked. However, the shade cloth wasn't completely stretched out and hung too low, so I decided to attach a couple more pieces of clothesline to create a swooping effect to help lift the shade cloth a little bit more. I never want the shade cloth to rest on top of the plants and need to give them a few feet of clearance for better airflow. Plus, on really windy days, the shade cloth gets pushed down, and if the leaves or branches of trees brush against it, the leaves get torn and young green branches can become damaged or broken. I learned that the hard way the first time I tried setting up shade cloth. I especially have to consider it when covering my mini orchard because once the shade cloth goes up, I expect to see new growth sprouting from the trees, so they'll put on some height even in the hottest days of summer. Without the shade cloth in full direct sun, almost every single plant and tree in Serendipity enters summer dormancy, in which they stop growing to try and survive. It reminds me a lot of winter dormancy, and some leaves even turn brown before falling off because they're scorched by the intense heat. But some of the most heat-tolerant trees like the citrus and mulberry keep most of their green leaves with minimal heat damage compared to more sun-sensitive tropicals. With the shade cloth, 50% of the sun's rays will be blocked, and because it is white, the light that does come through will be much softer and less harsh on the plants. Less sun also means the temperature underneath the shade cloth will feel significantly cooler than the areas without it. This should help the plants thrive comfortably with minimal damage, and it will also help me save on water because there won't be as much evaporation. I think about all of this as I continue working on the shade cloth, and it motivates me to keep going after what feels like the millionth time of dragging the ladder back and forth.
I'm finally done setting up the shade cloth. It was exhausting doing it, but I'm happy with the results. Right here, this whole area is bare right now, but that's only because I have another shade cloth coming in soon. I'll be attaching that too, so that'll make things a lot easier. But this is what the shade cloth looks like right now. That's not bad. I actually quite like it. There's a part of me that wants to add a few more strings just to make it a little bit higher, but it's fine. It doesn't look bad. The one over here also has the swoops, but it just has like 5 of them instead of 3, so that's why this one looks like it just hangs lower. It was so much easier to set up because I have a string right here where I can just pull it and extend it out if I want to, or I can close it back up, and it just makes the whole process way easier. And it's like, I would say maybe 2 feet higher than some of my trees in some areas, so we have enough room for airflow so that it's not like sitting on top of the plants, which is exactly what I wanted. But most importantly, it's going to cover up a lot of my tropicals, which is exactly what I was looking for. I will say that I have a lot of open space right here, so this whole little strip is going to get full sun basically. But I think that's okay because a lot of the stuff that I have here likes full sun anyways. So I'm going to have a lot of like watermelon, rosal hibiscus. I mean, some of my peach trees could look better have looked better, but they're hanging in there. I can't believe it's finally up, and it just feels so nice. And I like the fact that a lot of this area is just going to be more usable now that it's going to have shade cloth. I might keep cleaning up right now, but I don't think I'll film that part just because I'm so exhausted. I honestly don't have a whole lot of energy to talk or do anything else other than work.
For the rest of the day, I stare out the window with a huge smile on my face as I look at the white 50% shade cloth, and I hope with all my heart that it stays put at least for the summer so my garden can get a break from the heat. Later that night, I hear a loud rumble and I quickly run to the window in disbelief at the beautiful sight in the garden. Both the garden and I needed this rain to chase off the heat that seems to stick around no matter how dark it gets outside. But the job is far from over. Most of Serendipity is still exposed to the full sun, and this is only phase 1 of setting up shade cloth.